Welcome back to another episode of the Decision Hour. I'm your host, Adam Bird. Folks, I'm excited about the interview that we got lined up for you guys today. I met this organization several months ago now. so it's been this has been in the works, and I'm excited to have these guys on. If you're listening to this, it means you're already online. So just open up another browser and go to thefreedompeople.org. thefreedompeople.org. Follow along with us today. Grab a pen, something to write with. You're going to be happy that you did. So without further ado, I'm going to bring on Rex King right now. Rex, how you doing, brother?
Doing good. What's happening? How's everybody?
Good, man. Good. Listen, I'm excited to have you guys on. This has been a long time coming. I had met a colleague, or future mutual friend of ours, Bradley, here a couple months ago, and learned a little bit more about your the Freedom People and what you guys are doing. But before we dive into that, Rex, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, you bet. Again, my name is Rex King, and part of the Freedom People organization, we aim to assist Americans in dealing with certain aspects of their life that they may or may not be aware of, largely the difference between the public and the private, and what side is more beneficial for you to live in and when. So that includes additional information on both sides, public and private, and how we can help protect assets, protect your interest, children, etc., in a world that continues to change and become less and less free.
It's very interesting that you say it that way, Rex. For clarification, when you say the difference between public and private, can you elaborate on that for us, please?
Yeah, I think you guys, many people, I should say, have been exposed to this concept that there's a hidden world that exists below what we see as the public or what we're born into. And most of us live our whole lives there. We're pleased to say and observe that many people are becoming aware that there's another side, what we call the private side. And it's a matter of trying to get the information out in a way that's palatable. This is really a life study, and the Freedom People are constantly learning and researching all the time. And so it's difficult for us to really focus on one thing because there's so many solutions to tackle.
Yeah.
So we take one at a time and try to find the most simplistic way to explain what's going on without it being overly sensationalized, without it being overly made dramatic so that folks can't understand what's going on, and then try to come up with an ABC solution one step at a time to help them protect themselves or get where they need to be. So it's a long process,
Yeah.
and one step at a time.
So let me ask you, one of the things that I've been looking at, and it seems like there's been a lot more people this year, landowners, for an example, that own land. They said, well, the government can come in and take your land at any given time. But I heard that there was a way to register it where I don't know the proper terminology, so forgive me on this, and I'm not really sure how to word the question. I know it had something to do with land and your house, and
Yeah, no, it's a common question, and the idea, one of the first things that most people have a question about is, how do I protect my property? If you finally get to the point where you have property, which isn't always easy for regular folks, you finally do get a piece and you've got a house on it, then you're learning more about how abrasive the government agencies are and the county assessors and all the property tax and et cetera.
Right.
You start asking those questions. How do I protect it? How do I go about it? And this is kind of one of the problems that the Freedom People have, is that all this information and so-called remedies that exist out there on the internet are very muddled. It's a cloudy mess to try to navigate through to find out what's true, what's not, what works, what doesn't. And we had angles on solutions for many years and how do we attack this? And we decided, first things first, let's start building people private common law express trusts. And that, because every road ended there. Every remedy for everything, including land, including protecting property or avoiding property tax and all the other things, always ended up, well, you're going to need a trust. So we aim to find a solution on building trust for people. This is a few years ago. And how do we approach this? How do we streamline this process, knowing everybody's circumstances are different? How do we attack this and come up with a very robust, lawful approach to building private common law trust that the District of Columbia or the government's hands can't touch? And so we decided to just start with that. Now, I'm saying that first because all these other solutions that exist for all these other problems are irrelevant without first the trust. So we see it as the critical first step. You really can do some other things like avoiding property tax and these types of things but you're going to end up coming right back to this. If you don't do the trust first, you're leaving the door open for these agencies to pillage you. If the door is left open and you leave anything in the in the public that you're trying to protect, then that door is open so they can come back in on you. So let's do that first, and then let's start talking about these other solutions. Now, with these other solutions, this is where it gets cloudy and murky out there, because there's 10 stories or 10 different ways that we've heard that someone can avoid paying property tax. And I'll tell you what, it's and just the short answer is we decided to back burner that. Yes, there's ways to do it. Yes, there is. Is there just one way to handle any of these things? No, there's a lot of different ways to skin a cat. And the terminology that exists out there, the definitions of words, how people are using the words. We've talked about the law dictionaries, Black's Law, other types.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
These types of things can be very confusing because how you're using the word and what context and what solution or remedy you're trying to arrive at can vary greatly. So we've actually backburnered the property tax portion of it because it's not the hottest fire. People are getting pillaged in far greater ways through taxation, for example, than property tax. So yes, that's taxing, but property tax is far less significant dollar for dollar than most of our clients face with their businesses, which most of our clients are largely business owners.
Right.
And their exposure to unlawful taxation is far superior to that, or far in excess to that. So yes, there is a way to do it. Is it the first step? We don't recommend that. We'll deal with that later.
All right. So let's back up then. You're telling me trust. Now, for those, this may sound like an ignorant question, but can anybody start a trust?
Yes, anybody can. Anybody. Now, what type of trust is the question?
Okay. And how many different types of trusts are there?
There's you could probably say there's an infinite number of trusts. There's popular trusts or trusts that you've heard of, revocable trusts, irrevocable trusts, living trusts, God trusts. These are largely statutory trusts that are built in the public domain, usually by bar attorneys, and you pay them a decent amount of money, sometimes a lot of money, to build out a trust that is supposed to provide you with some level of protection. And it does, and sometimes you can delay taxation, capital gains, etc. But the recipients downstream of the trust and what it protects are going to get hit with this taxation at some point.
Eventually.
So how we see it is that if you don't address the gatekeeper to this whole thing about jurisdiction and who has dominion over who and who has control over who, then, you got to deal with that first. And the gatekeeper to it all is the IRS. The IRS does not have to be the opposing force that it seems to be. Once you learn its code and you understand how to use it properly and lawfully, it's actually a leverage point. It's not against you anymore, but you have to structure things appropriately and per its code and laws. So in that way, we want to make sure that we create the trust to meet their requirements of privatization first. And they leave the door open and have provision in the code to build a private common law trust that's outside the District of Columbia's jurisdiction, which is determined by the IRS. So we start there. The public trusts, or what we're talking about, revocable or irrevocable trust, living trust, these types of trusts, they are not structured that way. And so they do a good job of delaying taxation, but downstream they're exposed.
So Rex, would you say that that's a common misconception for people that are just starting to get into looking into this stuff? I've heard of a living trust and whatnot. And I was, I'll throw myself under the bus. Prior, several months ago when I was looking into this, I'd always grew up like, oh, you need a you know, a living trust, and you put your son on it, and you can do X, Y, and Z with it. But I did not know that was still kind of fell under the District of Columbia and the IRS stuff. So are you saying that a common law trust is more something that people should at least look at?
Yeah, if you're interested in not spending your life completely in the public, and you need to be in the public, you need to be in commerce in the public, you need to make money in the public. These are things that are a tool,
Right.
but it's who owns those tools and how private those tools are. The ownership of those tools is what's important. And so when we say tools, what are we talking about? We're talking about a business. Let's say that you have an LLC, for example.
Mm-hmm.
That LLC needs to make money. It's a revenue. It creates your means for profitability,
Right.
as an example.
Okay.
And if you leave that LLC in the public domain, then it's taxable. That entity, by its nature, in the way it was originated and set up, was set up through the IRS to be a public entity for profitability. And if there's profitability, then there's going to be taxation.
Right.
And so, per their code, you can follow the IRS and its laws and set up your organization so it meets the criteria to where those entities are not taxable. And this is through the privatization and who owns that. So if your trust is set up properly and your trust is set up in the private, then everything that it owns has the same classification or designation with them. So it's a very valuable way to set up your organization, and you can do that with many different assets. And so, you know, it's commonly known, or the idea is own nothing and control everything. This is a Rockefeller quote that those people who understand the concept of public and private participate in. Many of these families, their lives are completely built that way. Children are born into that understanding. Most Americans are not. They're born into a world of slavery. They're born into a world where all they know is you got to get the 9 to 5 with the benefits so that you can get by. And that is not true. It's just the information isn't readily available, and it's very confusing. So
was it done that way purposely?
Yes. I mean, the short answer is yes, absolutely. The powers that be and whatever we want to call them. I mean, this is the most sophisticated level of fraud that the world has ever seen, at least historically speaking. I mean, it is absolutely unbelievable, the layers and the depths that these people went to protect their interest via this fraudulent system.
Yeah.
And it's a multi-pronged approach. How they came up with this, and it's really a very short period of time. If you really want to get back to 1789, when you know, we really took off as a socialist democracy, and you can argue about that all you want, but from that point, just in a couple hundred years, how could a group of individuals come up with something so sophisticated to hide from everybody in a way that you can be born, live your entire life, and die and not have any understanding? And that's sadly the case for most people. So it's the layers of unraveling it takes a lifetime. As I said, this is a life study, and one step at a time. So the first step is to say, do you like being in the public? Do you like paying taxes? Do you like really being a slave? It's what we call legal slavery.
You know,
because go ahead.
Let me interrupt you real quick, Rex, because I'm hearing what you're saying, right? And I know there's other listeners that are out there. And again, those of you that are listening and you're liking what you're hearing, know that you can do something. Go to thefreedompeople.org. Open up the website and get in contact. The contact information's on there. It almost sounds like it's too good to be true. Like you're telling me there's a way to get out of the public and be more private. And it's like, you know, I'm 45, and you can tell by the gray on the goatee that I'm a little seasoned. And it's like, I think about the last 45 years of my life, we've been taught one thing, and this is what you do. You wake up, you find a job, you go to that job, you work that job for, 20, 30 years, you retire, you die, kind of a thing, right? It sounds like there's so much. There's like, at 45, I'm hearing what you're saying, it's like, man, there's a whole nother life out there that
Yeah, it is. There is.
that
I mean,
exists that I could potentially. There's still time for me to be a part of that.
a lot of time. And, we're advocates for handling all your affairs. I mean, we want you to be, we won't get into all that today, but in terms of health and longevity, the Freedom People are that's one of our cornerstone pillars of understanding. We want to teach people how to have great health too, because it doesn't matter if we come up with a solution to get you free, to bring you out of the system of slavery if you're sick.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are. So yes, absolutely. You're young. In our mind, you're very young. You have a huge amount of living to do. And it could be on the private side of life in freedom, where you're not looking over your shoulder and buying a bunch of crap you don't need for your business every year to have the expenditures so you don't pay as much tax.
Yeah.
I mean, you get a lot of good stuff that way, but you'd have more so-called cash in the bank if you didn't have to have these expenditures and these expenses to offset your profitability. So yes, absolutely. You got a lot of living to do, and everyone does. And it's, I was just with some family members just the other day, and these people are very conservative, patriotic people. But when I very, very subtly brought this subject up of the difference between the public and the private, and you don't have to handle your affairs like you are, they're talking about, oh, this property tax and the problems that we're having here. And we don't want to build the outbuilding or the barn out on the property because then the assessor is going to hit us with the bigger property tax. And so I just very loosely start talking about some solutions. And as soon as you tell someone that they don't have to follow all of those 14th Amendment U.S. citizen rules, regulations, statutes, ordinances, mandates, etc., their eyes glaze over.
Yeah.
They can't imagine that this is something that exists.
Yeah.
It's the social programming that's taken place from the day you're born, and as you said, till the day you die.
You often hear like, that's crazy talk. I've had people like, wow, that doesn't exist, or or that turns into that's a conspiracy, or or whatever. And what's funny is the more and more that I've looked at this and started to kind of, I'll say, crawl down the rabbit hole, the last, I'd say 8 months that I've really started looking into more and more of this type of stuff. It's just very eye-opening. It's very intriguing. It was just like, holy crap, why isn't everybody doing this? Now, I mean, we know why. We know that answer. But this is something that here you have a tool. Those of you that are listening here, you have a tool, the freedompeople.org. You have an organization here that's going to help you.
Yeah.
Live a better, quite frankly, I'm going to say it, live a better life. You will live a better life. Why you're not reaching out to them today? Reach out to them today, the freedompeople.org. Get in touch with these guys, because they're here to help.
And like you say, when you say that, why isn't everyone doing it? It's a great question. And there's a lot of reasons why, but some of the most important reasons why is that it's a pain in the ass. It's hard to figure it out.
Yeah.
And the information's there. It's actually not hidden from anyone, but how you collect the data and arrange it in a functional way, in a fashion of a timeline and checks and balances to get to the end goal, which is some type of remedy or solution to your problem, is very complicated. And we were studying this stuff for years. I mean, nearly 20 years trying to figure out how to handle it. And even now, even after all of that difficulty, trying to arrive at some point of clarity, some point of functionality that we can actually take a step forward and know that, one, it's working, and two, we're not looking over our shoulder. It's tough. And the only thing that we started with was building the trusts. There's a lot of other remedies that we're going to have in the future, and we're going to have these things and extended education tools available, client portals, so that we can customize our solutions and approaches to their needs. But right now, the most critical thing is to get these trusts built. We're good at those. We do them lawfully. And that's the critical first step. But the other reason, besides just the difficulty of it, that people don't live in the private or learn about this, is because, I hate to say it, a lot of people like their cage. They like it. It's comfortable.
Yeah.
It's stable. There's a level of reassurance when they wake up and they go through their their modality of thought, waking up, going through their morning routine, going to work, coming home, doing whatever it is, and then going to bed and getting up and wash, rinse, repeat again. And you can march your whole life away like that. And you can get dazzled by all the distractions that exist out there. And these are all great things. But as my grandfather used to say, hey, do everything, but do it in moderation.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with watching football. But if you're watching football so often that you're not learning about how you're a slave, then you might want to think about that. You can do whatever you want. You can do anything you want. We respect it. The freedom people respect it completely. But don't bitch when you're having problems. That's the thing. There's information out there. And not everybody wants it. Not everybody wants to be free. And so really, that's one of the things that, I mean, we had to come to terms with. There was a measure of naivety that we as an organization had to come to terms with. We thought because we were passionate about freedom, because we knew that we can't just grab our pitchforks and torches and rip these globalists out of their glass palaces and bring them to justice. You know, that's not the right way to do it, though a lot of us might want that. Okay. That's not really the appropriate way to handle this right now.
Yeah.
There's a system that exists in place that you can use that they honor and respect if you follow the laws and the rules of it, and you can find some remedy. Now, are we completely free if we're filling out forms and following these rules and regulations to protect ourselves? No, we're not completely free, but you're a hell of a lot freer than you were when you started as a 9-to-5 employee. So in that way, you know, it is the lesser of the two evils. But at least it's something. You're using the system without violence to protect yourself as best we possibly can. But we were very surprised on how few people actually wanted freedom. We thought we were going to blow the door off of it because we knew how to build trusts and protect people so well. We thought, oh man, I mean, it's going to be great. And we do. We work with hundreds of clients, but we're not working with tens of thousands. And it's
which you should be. Let's be honest. You should be. I mean, we walk around with these, you know, these pocket computers, and you got everything. You talk about freedom, Rex. It blows my mind because there's a, you know, as a military veteran myself, it's what we fought for, or you know, our freedoms here in the U.S. And it's like, yeah, I value that. I value what that looks like, and what we get for that. But then nobody wants to do anything to get it or to keep it, for that matter.
Yeah. It's the very discipline that makes our veterans and military and police and sheriff's departments such an exceptional value to society. The very thing that makes them so valuable. One, I mean, you got to have a good heart. I mean, you got to be part of any of that, you got to have some balls and you got to have a good heart and you have good intentions. And that's what we believe. And we're on the side of law enforcement. We're on the side of veterans. Our founder, Brad, is a veteran. And absolutely, we want that. We want to believe that we can help them as well. But the very thing that makes them so valuable to society is the discipline, and they learn a lot of that discipline in the social programming that teaches us to be good slaves. And so it's this really fine line on how do you do this? And I use them as an example because the discipline that they exhibit to be able to perform at the level that they do, and all levels that I just described, it's exceptional. And they have to be very dedicated to that. And that's clearly necessary. But all the rest of us that aren't doing exceptionally good things for society in terms of serving the community that way, we still have the same: get in line, follow the rules, follow the protocol, don't ask a lot of questions, do as you're told. And so it's this very difficult line to draw. Discipline's important. Following orders and following some structure of society is incredibly important. But if we do that to the point that we never, ever pick the stone up and look under it, or look around the corner, and we're just tunnel vision, dead set on what we're told to do, then we never discover all these other interesting ways to protect ourselves and leverage ourselves, because we're supposed to be the freest country in the world. And we've got like 6 million laws. I mean, it's hard to be free when you're jumping through that many hoops.
You know, it's funny that you bring that up. 6 million plus laws. I had This must have been about 2 years ago. I'll share this real quick for you listeners out there that are, Christians and whatnot. You guys remember the original 10 laws, right? The 10 Commandments is what they call them. And if you could go through all the laws that are in the United States, if you followed the 10 Commandments, you couldn't break a single one of the 6 million that Rex just said, laws that are on the books today. Just think about that for a second. Just anyway. Rex, it blows my mind though. 6 million laws, and they just want to create more and more laws. It's okay. Well, yeah, I won't get down that rabbit hole. That's another thing. Keep my blood boiling. But Rex, before go ahead, man.
Yeah, what would society look like if everybody just honored their neighbor and they did unto others as they'd like to have done unto them?
Oh God,
just real simple things.
Yeah, right. And we say it, and it is. It really is that simple. But with all
but the system that they've brainwashed us to live in is so restrictive and so oppressive and so much scarcity and fear that people don't have the ability to have the freedom and the peace of mind to be loving to each other. They don't have the comfort and the freedom to just relax and know there's plenty of everything. There is no scarcity. There is nothing to be afraid of.
Yeah.
When you're constantly in adrenal burnout from the stress of paying, living paycheck to paycheck, and this isn't working out. I got to get my kids over here. What am I going to do? They're graduating high school, and I got to get them to college, because if they don't go to college, they're not going to make a living, or how am I going to pay for it? It's just, if you stop and think about it, every aspect of your life, you're completely burned out by stress. Your adrenal gland is burning at the highest levels it can possibly burn, and you're not in a position where you can make sound decisions. What would the world look like if you had more freedom to do what you wanted to do and be more creative and have less lack? What would you look like? You'd be a hell of a lot less stressed out. You'd treat your neighbor better. You'd function better. Everybody would have enough. You'd see a turnaround so fast. People would not be cutting each other's throat because, survival of the fittest. It's a shame. You got to be tough. You do. And we're all for that.
Yeah.
You got to stand up for things. But this scarcity mentality is really driving a wedge between the American people and their solutions to get past that.
And I love how you said that. It's this is a mindset, folks. You really you have to want to, first off, you got to understand what's really going on. You are living in the largest psyop that's ever been created in mankind. And it's I'm so glad that you said what you said, Rex, about there's enough to go around for everybody. That we live in, a lot of people are fearful, stressful. What's the easiest way to control a large population? Instill fear in them and feel like they need X, Y, and Z. I'm really glad you said that. No, that's a good reminder for everybody that you don't have to. And again, not to get biblical, but you guys know how I am sometimes. 365 times in the Bible it says, "Do not be afraid." How many days are there in a year?
That's right. That's right.
That's not. You guys know me. I'm not. I don't believe in coincidences. So that being said, listen. If you're listening, open up another browser, thefreedompeople.org. Rex, you guys got. We touched on trust, and before we run out of time, there was something else that really was kind of intriguing to me, and I'd love for you to talk a little bit about it. Is the birth certificate side of things. Now, I'm used to, I got my little square thing from the 70s. It says my name and it's got a social security number on it. But what's this birth certificate double authentic? That's a big word for me. Authentication. I can't tongue tie. Anyway, What's the birth certificate thing about? That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, this is kind of along the same theme of critical first steps.
Yeah.
And when we look at an individual making a decision to come into the private side of life, they're going to have to set a couple things into motion. And one is get a trust started. I'm sure there's other organizations that do something. I'm sure there are now. We couldn't find any of them when we started. So we started it ourselves to do this properly. You got to get a trust started. You can't really do anything else. You can explore, you can learn, you can go down a lot of different rabbit holes, but you really aren't going to protect yourself without a private trust.
Okay.
That's critical. Once that trust is in in motion or the process of getting it built is underway, then you got to start looking at what other kind of property you want to protect in this trust. Okay, because the trust is going to be very, very robust in that it's the vehicle that you need to do everything in the private side of life. So what's a valuable piece of property? We talked about LLCs. We talked about these types of things. There's stock investments, cryptocurrencies, real estate, land, commercial properties, all the other things that you could possibly invest in are very, very valuable. But one of the most valuable things that has a value that's really unimaginable is your birth certificate, because that document at birth, when they create that off whatever mama names you, and they take the name mama gave you, and they create a legal fiction off of it. They create a corporation out of it. And they most of the time use your first, middle, last name in all capitals. We've all heard that. Yeah. That's very commonly understood. You can call that legal fiction or that corporation a straw man. You can call it an ins legis, which is the lawful term for it. These are legal fictions or fictional entities. And this particular corporation that's created out of your first, middle, last name at birth is obviously recognized on this birth certificate. And think of the birth certificate as a title to your car. It's really the best way to look at it. And that document represents tremendous amount of money. Now, you've heard stories where there's all these private hidden trusts that exist out there, and there's billions of dollars in these trusts. And you know what? A lot of that's true. How you access that is a whole nother subject. And it's even foggier than everything else we've talked about. So we don't focus our attention on that, but we do focus on is who owns that title. Let's at least find out who owns it first. Yeah. Let's get our hands on it. Let's take control over it. And then later on, we'll figure out if there's any money to gain from it. That's not the right way let's do this first. And so who has dominion or control over that document right now for sake of ease of understanding is the District of Columbia. The District of Columbia, known as Washington, D.C., that jurisdiction covers the entire North American continent. We're talking in straight, simple terms here. We could go down a lot of different layers of detail on all this kind of stuff, but just for argument's sake, we're talking about the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C. They have their districts that stretch across the entire continent. They have jurisdiction over everything that does business with them. Okay. And the certificates of title, these birth certificates that they have off of our first, middle, last names, they own. So there is a process that you can go through, what we call double authentication. It's a very lawful process and very, very straightforward. It's not overly complicated. And that process will release title from the District of Columbia so that we can now place it squarely and safely in your private common law trust. So that's another service that we actually have as a free course on our website. You can do that without doing anything else with us, because you need to do it. You need to do that first before you can protect it. So we make that available for free. You can go to freedompeople.org and join the free course and go through that process without even working with us in any other capacity.
Now, let me ask you something, Rex, on that. With the, as a veteran and I'm going through the different VA, disabilities and stuff like that. And again, ignorant question, I'm sure, but if I change that, or if I get the authentication from them, where it becomes mine, or where I can protect it, does that then open me up to losing any certain benefits or anything like that you have through the VA or anything like that? Does that change things later on?
No, it doesn't. And the idea here is that think of that asset, that entity, as a business, because that's what they see it as. You're the guy that wakes up every morning, like we said before. You get up, you go through your morning routine, you do your regular deal, you go to work, you come home, you do that the whole life, and you die. Well, that whole time, they're making money off of you via taxation and all kinds of other ways, traffic tickets, court cases, child protection services, divorces, your driver's license, every single place you put your signature, they're making money off of you your entire life. So it's not just through this idea of this corporation via the birth certificate. I mean, it's It's much deeper than that. I mean, that's where it starts. That's the document that identifies you as a corporation that they're going to own, but they see you as a business, and it's a subcorp to the for-profit U.S. corporation under the District of Columbia. So it's a very valuable asset, and it's worth a lot of money to them. And so what we need to understand is that instead of letting them make the money off of that business, that corporation, that straw man, let your trust be the beneficiary of those accolades, achievements, revenue that comes from that business. So the status of that corporation in terms of its capacity to net you a profit or make you money, not you, but your trust, your trust is the beneficiary, it still exists. So nothing changes. It's no different than if, well, you see it all the time in corporate America when the little, hardware store gets bought out by the big box chain, or a retail store, auto dealerships, food store. It doesn't matter what it is, grocery. It doesn't matter what it is. You see acquisitions, and when bigger entities buy profitable businesses and bring them underneath their umbrella, it's no different. The first, middle, last straw man corporate fiction that the District of Columbia makes money off of is owned by them. We can own it. Our trust can own it and still make the money. So if you're a firefighter, if you're a commercial contractor, if you're a banker, all those things don't change. Social Security is a touchy subject. That's not something that is easy to talk about because, again, our social structure tells us that, hey, you've been working, busting your ass your whole life. You deserve to have a little back. You've been taking money, paying into it your whole life. You should get it. So people have a real fondness for the idea of getting this stipend Social Security payment when they get to the appropriate age. We don't really recommend that. That's not something that you really need in life. Again, back to the theme of there's no scarcity. You're going to have plenty if you set your mind to it. There's ways to be wealthy. There's ways that you do not have to live that way. What a sad story that we bust our balls our whole lives, and then we get a very small stipend to live out our golden years.
Yeah.
That's not something that we think is wise. We're sympathetic to it. We understand it. We understand why people find that so valuable, but it's not. It's them telling you that you can't handle your own affairs, and so they're going to make you pay in your whole life so that you can live as a pauper until you die. You're not mature enough to handle your own financial affairs in their mind because you're seen as a minor or a child, which is infirm or incapable of handling its own affairs. So they're going to do it for you, and they're going to give you that at the end.
Good.
But all that to say, yes, you could still get your Social Security stipend payment after you move that birth certificate properly over into a private trust and everything else. If you have a PhD, if you're anything you could think of, because that's not you. The business, the first, middle, last straw man character, the ins legis that we're talking about that has all those achievements, isn't you. You, the living man, identify that as that business, but that's not you. And so it's a business that your trust is going to own. And so in that way, those things don't change. Now, there's a lot of different ways you can leverage yourself and pull the living man out of the system that can be discussed. But in terms of that business, the business really doesn't need to come out of the system. It's a public entity. It just needs to be owned by a private entity.
Right.
And that's what the trust does.
I love it.
So yeah, a lot of that stays the same.
I love it. There's so much, folks. There's so much, and that's big reason why I wanted these guys on and to bring them on, because we're looking to be working with these guys, and they're going to be an asset moving forward, not only for the show, but for Heroes Media Group, our parent network as well. So if you're listening to the show, again, open up another browser and go to thefreedompeople.org. They got some great services. We've talked about some of them today. Rex, we're coming up on time. I got one more question for you, man.
Yeah.
You're on a show called The Decision Hour, and we have to make decisions every single day. Name a time in your life where your feet were on the line and you had to make that decision. What was it, and what was the atmosphere like?
Well, I'll tell you what, I mean, I think anybody in our space or this movement, this movement of real remedy, patriotism, freedom-minded organizations that are out there. And most of what all of us do in life is just bitch about everything. We're confused why the government isn't doing things on our best interest, why there's only two choices, Republican and Democrat, Protestant, Catholic. I mean, I won't get into all the other ones, but there's very few choices, very, very few choices, and mostly a lot of bitching and complaining that's gone on because we feel powerless. We don't feel like there's anything that we can do without a violent uprising, which nobody wants. We all know down deep that might be necessary, but it's not beneficial at all. And there's a lot of loss that comes from it. And so when we all sit around and complain out of frustration because we don't know what else to do, for me, and I've studied this material for a long time, and again, it's been very difficult to sort it out. And we're arriving and landing squarely on the things that we do know for sure. And as an organization, what we can do to help in a lawful way. And that's great. But this was a long time coming for me, and how many years it takes. And during that process of bitching myself and complaining and wondering what to do, when the day came when I knew that I could make a decision to take this next step and protect my family, my children, my marriage, my assets in the private domain. And I knew that was going to be a commitment, because once you go down that road, and this isn't for everybody, that's very important to understand. We can't even work with everybody. Some people just aren't ready. That's just the nature of it. And that's okay. We're here when you are ready. But when I had to make that decision, that was what it was. It was that day to know that you can't go back. Once you start, once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once you commit to it, it's just like that bungee jump. Once you go, you're going, yeah. You're going, you're not coming back. You're bouncing up on the rope. There's no coming back. You can't stop midstream. And so that was it for me. When I decided to make the plunge from the public to the private and commit me and my family to live in that way so that our future generations could know freedom.
Thank you again for jumping on today and speaking with our listeners today.
Hey, thank you guys for having us. We appreciate all that you do, and we're looking forward to talking with you guys again.
Absolutely. Folks, thefreedompeople.org. Go check it out. That's all the time that we have today. Before we let you go, make sure you also check out our parent network, Heroes Media Group. Go check out all the shows and new articles that are coming up over there. Until next time, you've been listening to The Decision Hour.